Terpenes. You can see all of the alleged effects posted on the display in the dispensary when you walk in. But is there any science to back it up, or is it just a ploy for your bud tender to upsell you things? Today, I, a drug scientist, am going to explain to you what we actually know according to the science behind terpenes. So weed contains hundreds of compounds. Like, we're talking about the standards like THC and CBD, but it also contains things like CBN and CBG, and yes, terpenes. So what are terpenes? They're just natural compounds that are found in a lot of plants, and they happen to be found in weed as well. And so there's a whole bunch of them, and they're responsible for things like the aroma, so the smell of the plant, as well as like the taste of it if you're doing things like smoking it. So you have like linalool, which is like the floral scent, and then camphor, which is the mothball scent, and then pinene, which is something like the tree-like scent. And like, we know this pretty well, so we know how the terpenes are linked to like aromatics. However, it gets a little bit more sketchy when we talk about how terpenes are related to other things. So if you go to like a bud tender, they're like, oh yeah, these terpenes, they're basically changing how the weed is affecting someone. And that part we have actually no evidence behind. And when I say no evidence, I mean no scientific evidence. So there are definitely some people who have a spreadsheet somewhere who are like, yeah, this one makes me feel like this, and this one makes me feel like this. But in terms of the science, we have basically nothing. So let me tell you what we do have. So a lot of this discussion started with this idea of the entourage effect. And the entourage effect is basically saying that it's not necessarily just like THC alone. It is like THC in combination with other things that produces its effect. So it's not necessarily just this one compound in weed. It's like all of them together that are doing things. And so it can be things like THC and other compounds. It can be that with CBD or that with CBN. But it can also be things like terpenes with other terpenes, or terpenes with THC. So basically, the entourage effect is just saying that like the sum of these chemicals together is greater than each of them individually. So they are doing something together that produces more of an effect, that has a synergistic effect, if you want to think of it that way. And yes, synergy is a real word that is not just used in business senses. It's also used in drugs to describe that when you put two things together, they produce way more of an effect than you would expect just by each individual alone. So the basic premise of the entourage effect came from the fact that like people would do original studies and they would see that they would get like greater pain relief if you had the combination of cannabinoids together instead of each one alone. So they're like, okay, there's something going on here. It's not just this specific chemical. It is this with other things, this within the plant itself. Problem is, we don't have a ton of actual scientific data on the entourage effect, even just that portion of it. So we do have things that say like pain relief is better when it's THC plus other drugs. And we do have a lot of like cell effects. So we'll look at things like the effects of different cannabinoids on breast cancer cells or colorectal cells. And we'll actually see that combined, they have more of an effect than each one individually. Like, a lot of the entourage effect is done in rodents and cells, and there's actually very little of it done in humans. And when you start looking at the terpene data, there's even less of that. So like, people do study terpenes on their own. That is a very common thing to look at. And so they look at things like, oh, do they have antioxidant effects? And we do see that terpenes on their own can provide some sort of pain relief, and they also seem to reduce anxiety too. So even in the rodent study, sometimes you see that terpenes have an effect when combined with other cannabinoids, and sometimes you don't. They did find that terpenes can actually mimic other cannabinoids, or can mimic things like THC and CBD, but they don't seem to do much on their own. Or if they do, you have to use a very high dose, probably not one that you're going to find in the strains that you find in a dispensary. Now, we do have some research on terpenes in combination with other cannabinoids, specifically two studies. Here's what they found. They found that in one of the studies, D-limonene actually did decrease anxiety when combined with THC. So there was some sort of combination entourage effect, if you want to think of it that way. But then another study showed that alpha-pinene did absolutely nothing. Maybe the combination can be better for things like anxiety relief, but when it comes to like how much people like the drug, if it's making them enhance the effects of it, if it's changing the ability of things like weed to influence memory, that does not seem like, at least in this case, alpha-pinene does anything. And the problem is those are the only two studies. Like, the board that you see that says that this terpene does this thing and produces this effect, that comes from basically nowhere. That is some sort of like anecdotal myth piece of information that we have absolutely no scientific evidence on. Because we do have a lot of like biochemical stuff on terpenes, and we do have a lot of like basic science on terpenes, but we don't have a lot of the human version. Now, probably this is due to the fact that weed is still a Schedule 1 drug, so we as scientists can't just do this research easily. Like, we can't deconstruct this drug because we're literally not allowed to study it unless we have a specific license that's incredibly difficult to get. And say, like, if I wanted to go up to a Schedule 1 license from a Schedule 2 through 5 and then be able to actually do this research, think about how difficult it actually is. So we have like 200 terpenes in weed flower. Let's go back to math here for a second. And I know nobody wants to actually hear that, but you remember that like exclamation point at the end of things saying that there's like this factorial, like 200 times 199. So it gives you an idea about how many different combinations you might have. Yeah, this is an astronomically huge number of potential combinations. We've just started doing the research to see how THC and CBD actually interact with one another, and those are just like two different cannabinoids. Like, imagine all the different combinations of terpenes that you can have. So is it the THC plus CBD plus CBN plus pinene, or is it the linalool plus pinene plus CBD without the THC that actually matters? Imagine how difficult this is going to be to do. So, like, there's probably something there with terpenes. Like, we do see that the flower itself, the full plant, actually produces very different effects than when you just kind of take out the different components of it. But it's nothing compared to the information that people say that we have out there. So they say that, like, limonene can produce uplifting effects. We have nothing that actually suggests that. Now, I also think that us drug scientists should be talking to people like growers to try to figure out which directions we should be going in, because while we don't have the actual science, that doesn't mean that people have not been trying to do some kind of good research on their own. Fortunately, there's just like no protocol in place that they can transmit their information to us and we can transmit our information to them. Yes, us scientists should be looking into this far more in the future, but like for now, don't buy into the idea that linalool is going to cause couch lock.